Hello everyone, my name is Dhruv Sharma and I welcome you all on the session on Cisco Umbrella. So from this session, we have planned that we're going to pick up all technical topics and pick up from the ground zero level and discuss it at the expert level. So that's why we call it from zero to hero. You can contact me on my LinkedIn and my official YouTube channel below. So, as per Cisco research, 90% of attacks happen at the DNS layer. And that's why Cisco comes up with a solution to fix the DNS attacks. And, and it happened in August 2015 when Cisco acquired OpenDNS. And now it is rebranded as Cisco Umbrella. For more details, you can access this link. So the DNS plays a very vital role when we access internet or any services. It happened like we go on a browser and type in website like google.com. So we don't remember the IP addresses. We just use the name, the google.com, and it translates into an IP address. So if in case an attacker in your environment try to hijack your local DNS server and spoof your your host name of your web server and provide you its own custom IP address, and that will take you to a different website, and from there it can capture your credentials using a phishing attack, or it can lead to a ransomware attack or ransomware attack. And finally, the Umbrella also provide content filtering feature and intelligence proxy, which we will look into much details in a couple of minutes from now. So how can we implement this OpenDNS come Cisco Umbrella? For home users, it's very difficult for us to implement umbrellas as a solution because it's a bit expensive. So that's why OpenDNS comes up with a solution where they have provided their free DNS services. You can use these DNS server in your TCP/IP settings within your laptop, and once you are done, you can just access this URL and confirm whether that will give you a message that yes, it's working fine and it's safe. But this implementation is only limited to the home users, and its policy is not very strict as per your environment. That's why the implementation happens for the enterprise users. Before we look into the implementation for the enterprise users, which is very complex, but let's look into the prerequisites. First, we need to register for the account on Cisco Umbrella sign up web link as shown over here. And once you log in, you will receive an email address. You will receive an email, and you have to provide your credentials. And finally, you are able to log in into the Umbrella console over the cloud, as shown. In the cloud URI, you will going to get a company's ID, where you can basically note it down, which will be used for your further communication. Because when you're going to do some further configuration, this will be very handy. The second step of prerequisite is to configure your network properties, where you need to provide your public IP address, which is configured at your internet router in your offices. But the main problem is if you are a small company user or a home user or a lab, like in my case, if I have configured my umbrella in a lab environment, I will not be having a single public IP address because the IP addresses will change daily. For instance, I will show you in my case, if I go on Google and type, what is my IP? So currently it's showing this is my IP address range, but it changed. See, as you can see the screenshot, it changed. It was earlier different because my ISP will change the public IP address, which is allocated to me almost daily. So we need to provide an IP address, public IP address, which Cisco Umbrella will receive its DNS traffic from your environment. If in case, if it happens that your addresses will be changed, as in my case, daily, in that case, when you enable, if you go into deployment, And network settings, you have to check this checkbox over here, which will instruct Umbrella that, boss, my IP address will change daily. So you have to remember to check this box. And once you check this box, you have to download a dynamic update IP updater client from this link below. You can download it and install it on your domain controller or a DHCP server, which comes first, which comes live or first in your network. Usually it's a domain controller or a DHCP server that will send an update back to your Umbrella client that this is my latest IP address. Finally, the registration is complete. Happy days. And you can see the status of your network settings will change from inactive to active. I will give you a quick demo for connecting to my appliance. If I go under deployment and the networks section, so that happens to be my IP address 29, because this changes dynamically, and I've checked this box dynamic to ensure that it always gets updated as soon as my DHCP or a domain controller is updated. After the prerequisites are done, we have to decide which deployment standard we're going to opt for. The option 1, that's pretty simple one, and it's not really very popular, where all the corporate users will be forwarding their DNS query to their local DNS server like they usually do. But the local DNS server will be configured with forwarders pointing towards the Umbrella DNS server. Let me show you how. That's my domain controller. If I go back to my DNS server, properties, forwarders, yeah. If I go back into the network settings, from there, I can basically get my DNS servers. As you can see, I have used the DNS servers which are allocated to me by Cisco, and I have to configure them as forwarders. So in a nutshell, all the users will be forwarding their queries to their local DNS server, which is configured in their TCP/IP settings, and the internet queries will be forwarded to our Umbrella server, which will be further resolving it and responding back to the local DNS server, and the local DNS server will be recursively answering back to the clients. Simple, isn't it? That will be the topology. Workstations are configured with the DNS server of .16. Perfect. You can see under the reportings, I will show it to you in a couple of minutes, how we can see the results of our of the traffic results for analysis in a little shortly. And the option number 2. The option number 2, where the Cisco recommends, this is a recommended solution where Cisco recommend us to deploy two Umbrella appliances in your data center to offer resiliency. And this Umbrella appliance will be configured as an authoritative DNS server, and all the clients, all the workstations will be configured to use the DNS server IP address of these Umbrella VM appliances. And using a policy, using some configuration on the cloud, we will instruct these Umbrella VM appliances to ensure that only the internet queries are forwarded to the Umbrella cloud server, and the local domain queries are forwarded to the DNS server. Nice, isn't it? Okay, so this will be the topology which we will be using for the rest of the session, where I have installed .19.20 as a virtual appliance on my ESX server. As I can show it to you, .19 and .20. And the IP address of my Windows 7 workstation is .12, and it's configured with the DNS server IP address is 19 and 20. That's over here. 19.20. That happens to be my VMware VM umbrella server. And we're going to configure our umbrella server to ensure that all the local DNS queries are forwarded back to the domain controller and only internet queries are forwarded to the Cisco umbrella. The implementation happens in just 6 simple steps. In the first step, we're going to configure our umbrella VM server. The OVA file can be downloaded from our cloud umbrella server, that which we can download on our Windows client and run it on our ESX server. And finally, we have to configure our umbrella server to instruct our VM servers to only forward the internet queries and let the local DNS queries are resolved by the local DNS server. And ensure that all internal users use umbrella VM as the DNS server. Let's look into the first 3 steps first. Let's look into it then. Yeah. And once we are clear with the first three steps, then we want to look into these remaining steps 4, 5, and 6. Right. So over here we can see that we can basically download the VM image from the Cisco Umbrella console. If we go under configuration and sites and Active Directory, under the download section, we can see a VMware EXXI image which we can download. I downloaded it and currently running it on my ESX server as shown over here. As Cisco recommends, we to have 2 images running to have better resiliency. The first DNS server can be configured as a primary and the second DNS server can be configured as secondary. That happens to be in my case as well. .19 is configured as a primary and as you can see, yeah, .19 is configured as primary and .20 is configured as secondary. The second step is to, once it is done, we have to ensure that these servers are reflected back on your cloud server. If you go back in my live console, that's a live device. I can see that .19 and .20, they are green status and they're working perfectly fine. The second step, if you remember those steps, we have to ensure that the second step is very important. We have to ensure our VM appliance is to ensure that only the internet queries are forwarded to the Umbrella Cloud server. We can configure it by defining the domain. In my case, my domain controller name is barbie.com. So if I go back on my domain controller, here, barbie.com. So I have to go back on my VMware, my Cisco Umbrella Cloud server and define the domain name barbie.com over here under domain management setting under configuration to ensure that the VM server is quite aware that only domain queries related to barbie.com like dhruv.barbie.com, xcisco.barbie.com, all these queries related to this domain, only those are forwarded to local DNS server. So this step is very important. Oops, yeah. So so 3 steps are completed as I promised. These steps are very easy, and the 4th, 5th, and 6th step they lay the foundation of the policies. In these 4, 5 steps, the 4th step we define the trusted network. What I mean by trusted network, if you look into the topology, so my topology is very pretty flat network. So I'm using 192.168.1. It's class C subnet, and that's a network range. And subnet mask is 255.255.255.0 class C subnet. And we need to define the class C subnet range, the trusted network. This step will be useful when we're going to create security policy in our 6th step. And we also define a site name. It's not mandatory, but it is highly recommended, especially when we have offices in different locations. It will help us to segregate the policies. So default site is already created. Its name is default. We can create a new site, Narnia, or maybe any name you can give it, and it will help us to how it will help us in housekeeping of those policies. That this is policies is for Narnia, this policy is for London office, this policy is for India office. So also, so it's just for housekeeping purposes. First step, we define the trusted network. We will use it later on. And finally, we define the sites. We go back into the Active Directory sites and create a new and define the site name. Perfect. I will give you a quick demo as well. We have the lab environment. We have the sites mentioned over here. The sites are reflected over here. Pretty simple, isn't it? The sixth step, that's pretty important, and that's why we all are here to create the security policies. So the security policies on the umbrella is basically happens in like layered policy structure where we have the default policy. As per my experience, it's not highly recommended to modify the default policy. We can just keep it as it is, and we're going to create custom policy on top of the default policy. The policy on the top, we're going to take a preference on the policy which lays at the bottom. So if any traffic doesn't match the top policy, it will be monitored or allowed by the default policy. So the policies basically is applied to identities. So, identities can be a user, a network, or a roaming user. We're going to look into the roaming users a little later. But when we integrate our umbrella VM umbrella client with an Active Directory using connectors, we can integrate our umbrella VM using to AD using some connectors. Sorry for my bad handwriting. So these are some piece of software which you can download on a server, and that will bridge the connectivity between the umbrella server and the Active Directory. From there, you can basically import those AD users and groups from the Active Directory, which can help you to create the policies. So I didn't create it in my lab instance, but yes, it's pretty easy. But the policy, what consists of these settings? The blacklisted and whitelisted destination. In this component where we can manually define that these are the blacklisted and whitelisting destinations. So certain domains like 777.com, if that's a gambling website, I have to manually define it as a blacklisted. Or if I believe that gambling.com is quite related to my business because it's my main customer, 777.com. For instance, I can manually define it in a whitelisting destination so that all the security controls will be bypassed for it. Second, the DNS layer. It's pretty important because that's where we define all the DNS and phishing settings. We're going to look into it. Content filtering, it's pretty important again because we define what contents based on the category of the websites. Like some domains, we have to define adultery website, porn websites, gambling websites. We can define like a typical proxy, right? We can define basically like what all kind of categories are allowed or not. Application control policy, we define applications like Skype, Zoom, all those applications are allowed or not. And finally, the AMP policy, which is not typically an AMP solution. It's not a typical AMP solution. I can just want to clarify it. It's basically, files will be monitored when you download it from internet, and it will just compare the hash. If you download it from your umbrella using umbrella solution, it downloads, it will compare the hash signature with Cisco Talos hash signatures. And if it matches, it will going to block it. And if it doesn't matches, it will going to allow it. So there is no concept of sandboxing or other cool stuffs which typically comes with an AMP solution. So it just simply checks the for the signatures. That's it. If it matches, it allows. If it doesn't matches, it doesn't allow. It also offers us to set up our custom block pages. You know, when a URL is blocked by Umbrella, we can custom it with our company logos. If you don't want to use the Cisco default custom pages, happy to change it. Intelligence proxy, that's pretty cool stuff to discuss it, right? It's an additional feature when we use along with the DNS service. Cisco Talos is very intelligent. It's very rich resource intelligent service where almost all the popular websites and known websites are categorized based on its content. It has the information that this website is malicious. It has this. It must have those hash signatures with it. But websites are built up and created daily, so it's very difficult for Talos to update it instantly, right? Immediately it cannot add a malicious website into its database within a few seconds. So in that case, intelligent proxy plays a very vital role. Let me show the intelligent proxy how it works in form of a diagram. So if in case the user try to access a website and the umbrella is not aware of this website, it's the VM forwards a query to the umbrella server, and the umbrella server is not able to remember, like is not able to resolve whether it can be trusted or not. So using this intelligent proxy, the intelligent proxy will going to forward a request using its own IP address, and it will receive the response. Using some cool machine learning technologies, it will try to understand whether the website is basically malicious or not. And then if it is not, then the query, if it is not, only if it is not, then the response will be fed back to the user. If it is, then the response will not be forwarded. Allow only mode, we'll discuss it later, but yes, it's basically you're not going to you're going to allow the traffic only for the destinations which you define it over there, because by default all the access to the destinations will be blocked unless you explicitly allow it. It's pretty strict control. We don't really use it. Finally, the logging, we have to enable the logging to ensure that we can do some research or troubleshoot the issues. Okay, so we're going to go under the I'm going to give you the demo as well, but just quickly walk you through the screenshots under the deployment section. All policies, we go back into the network, we identify the networks. Remember, we basically we created the network in our previous slides, and we can call that network over here, and we can call the sites. So it's basically the identity where the policy will be applied to the network where we initially created the trusted LAN and the networks and the site. The second step, the advanced feature, where we have to identify, it's highly recommended to enable the SSL policy. It's optional to enable SSL decryption, where that's intelligence proxy which I was talking about, where the domains or the website which is not aware to the Talos, the proxy function will happen. It has option to enable SSL decryption as well. So let me show it to you. If you go back under the deployment policies, all policies, yep, let it come up. Yep. So that's the policies. So under the advanced settings, we have we can enable it, intelligence proxy, and I have enabled SSL decryption, because if there is any encryption or website is encrypted, it is very difficult for the proxy to analyze the traffic, whether the website is malicious or not. But it might not be very it's decrypting all the websites might not be very might not be always used because sometimes the confidential data the website is carrying, like credit card information, the healthcare traffic. So there is always an option to create an exception list. Like you can financial institutions, health, illness, you can basically create those exception list where for certain kinds of website like banks and healthcare websites, the decryption won't happen. So intelligence proxy will not going to work for those kind of websites. So here the file inspection, the AMP feature policy, which I was talking about, where we can enable it. Oops, big up. Yeah. So the file policy, no great setting. We just have to enable it and disable it. So just enabling it, will going to let our umbrella to download those files and inspect it. The DNS layers, application layers. So first part where we define the what kind of policy we're going to create, the security settings. I want to enable malware. You need to check the phishing attacks, command and controls. You have to enable all those policies and options. Second, we have to create the content filtering policy. I'm going to show you all once we go through. I just want to walk you through the screenshots. You can enable the content filtering options, what kind of policy you have to allow, like drugs and also you can just click this using a checkbox. The application control, like we have enabled for Skype and enable it for any kind of services. I've done it for Skype and Zoom. Finally, the whitelist and blacklist. Honestly, I don't recommend to. I really recommend to use the default whitelist and blacklist to avoid any further confusion because you can define what what all websites can be allowed, and you can finally define the custom block pages. So before we proceed further, let me quickly give you the demo what I was talking about. If you go to the policy, so I can create a new ad policy. I can define a new AD groups, or if we have integrated with the AD, which I haven't, I have to install a connector for it. I can define the networks and the sites. The new site which I've created in Narnia. I will click next. I have to enable all these options. Yes, I have to enable it. I want to use all the features provided by the guys. I click next. Default settings, or you can use the new settings. I can use the default, or I can create a new one as well. I will use the default one, the lab one, which I've already created. I can enable the phishing attacks. Want to enable more malware. That's basically the security, the DNS security policy you want to allow. I can allow the dynamic DNS, or you want to block the dynamic DNS. It's a few websites, they do use dynamic DNS as well. So you can just enable and disable it as per your requirements. Finally, the content analysis. You can basically define what all content you want to block or allow. You can create your, luckily Umbrella comes up with inbuilt policy, high, moderate, and low. You can define it, you can use the existing one, or you can create a new one, give a new name. For now, I think I created it for my own one, lab one, which I have defined for alcohol, dating, drugs, hacking, gambling, all sort of websites. So I've blocked gambling. I click next. Application control, I can still use my custom one, which I created, and you can define all sort of services and softwares which you want to use. I click next. We can create a global work list, or we can modify the existing one. I can enable, disable the file, the analysis. I will enable it. The block pages, yeah, I will prefer to use the existing Umbrella default block page. I can give a name. Click Save Changes. So the policy we're going to take from top to bottom. So first priority will be test demo, Dhruv lab policy, and then finally the default policy. So that's how the policy will be created. Before we proceed, we can look into how we can troubleshoot the issues. We're going to one of the most popular troubleshooting tools is to go use a policy tester. So, for example, uh, if I go under the deployment all policies, go into policy tester. After define a name, Dhruv lab. Oops. Okay, this is all there. It took some time. 777.com. That's a popular gambling website. I'm going to run a test. If a user happens to complain for a website which is not accessible, you can basically do a policy tester to check whether the website is basically allowed or not. And we can see that the policy is not allowed, and it has been blocked by a test demo policy, which basically resides on the top. This is pretty cool tool. It's very used when we basically implement or basically when we troubleshoot it on a daily basis. And coming back to the cost perspective, which solution to opt for, you can refer below packages. Once you purchase a solution, you can opt for a wireless LAN, professional insights, and platform. It basically depends on number of users is trying to inspect, and this one is for access point. So you guys can go through this link, and for the cost reasons, you can basically contact Cisco. The higher the number of users will basically professional is the highest one. So the more the number of users, the more costlier the service is, and then the references. The questions, yes, the popular questions: how can I verify if I'm using Cisco Umbrella? You guys can basically go back and on your server, just basically try to access this URL. It's pretty simple. Go to browser, welcome.umbrella.com. Open up, welcome to the umbrella, your internet is protected. So it's pretty simple way to identify whether you are using umbrella or not. The second question, is it supported for mobile devices? Yes, it is. You can access this link and get more information. For implementing a crowd umbrella solution, now what firewall ports are required? Good question. I picked up these questions from the forums and a couple of my friends who asked these questions. So this is one of the top questions which I got. So I pasted on my slides. So we have to allow port TCP 8443 between the cloud umbrella and the VM servers, 53 and UDP 53 and TCP 53. So the UDP TCP ATN 443 basically used for downloading the updates from the umbrella to the VMware workstation or VMware umbrella client, and UDP 53 is just for the DNS queries, and TCP 53 is basically used for encryption, so encryption only. So the communication will be encrypted between the VM appliance and the Cisco Cloud Umbrella, and that happens on port 53 encryption. But if in case TCP 53 is blocked on the firewall, this guy blocks the communication TCP 53, it will fall back to TCP or UDP 5353. So if in case you are not allowing TCP 53, you have to allow on your firewall TCP or UDP 5353. Oops. Yes, one more question. Is there any operating system supported with Umbrella for roaming users? Yes, you refer below the roaming users. Before we wrap up the session, I quickly will cover what's roaming users is all about. The roaming users basically happens to be a user who is basically is an employee of the corporate LAN, but somehow he is basically residing on internet, and if he's connected to the VPN, based on the VPN settings, we can enforce the DNS servers that happens to be the VMware-based DNS server that will be inherited by the VPN settings. But what happens when the user is not connected to the VPN and he's accessing internet without connecting to the VPN? The challenge happens that what if he can access a website and that website brings a malware or some kind of infected files into the system, and when later on when the user access the network over the VPN, that malicious files will be sent back to the corporate LAN, and that can cause lots of problems. So the roaming users is a solution you have to opt for, which in case what happens, the two solutions. One way is to install uh, roaming client into the workstation, and all the policies from the umbrella server will be installed on that client itself, like it is installed on the VMware umbrella server, which I've shown it over here. The same way the policies are installed on that small client, which is installed on those workstations, small, very thin client, which is installed. Or you can, the second option is you can integrate that client with your AnyConnect client, which is already installed on your laptops. So if in case you are using a Palo Alto or a Checkpoint VPN client, which is in that case, you have to install a new client on your workstations that can enable that roaming user profile on your workstation. Any questions? You can just leave your questions in the area, and I will definitely revert back to you. Or you can send me your questions over LinkedIn, and I will be happy to answer you. And I hope this session was useful, and thank you for joining.